Atlanta. Before the sun commits to rising, a city of 5 million people already moving, highways filling, coffee brewing, the first flights of the day rolling toward runways in the dark. Inside one glass tower, 47 floors is up, a single light is on. A man sits alone at a long table. In front of him, a folder. 47 pages. He is not reading anymore. He already knows what it says. He has known for 3 weeks. He reaches into the pocket of a gray hoodie, takes out a letter, sets it on the table like something that cost him something. Outside, an airplane crosses the dark sky. Navigation lights blinking, steady, unhurried. The man looks at the letter one last time. Then he stands, picks up his keys. No suit, no driver, no announcement. Just a man, a hoodie, and a letter he has been carrying long enough. He walks out the door. The city does not know what is coming. He owns 67% of the airline, every gate, every plane, every seat on every route. And that morning, a woman looked him in the eye and told him to get his black ass out of her seat. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. James Caldwell sat alone in the conference room at 5:47 in the morning. The sat outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was still dark. Not the deep dark of midnight, the gray that comes just before the light commits to arriving, Atlanta in October. Cool and still and unhurried. On the table in front of him was a folder, 47 pages, one complaint per page. 47 passengers who had filed something, sent it somewhere, and waited. None of the 47 complaints had reached his desk through normal channels. He had found this folder by accident, 3 weeks ago, misfiled email for the head of HR. He had opened it expecting a budget summary. He had stood at his desk, reading all 47 pages without sitting down. When he finished, he stood there for another 2 minutes, not reading, just standing. Then he had started making a plan. The plan was simple. Uncomfortably simple, for something that had taken 3 weeks to arrange. He was going to get on one of his own planes, in regular clothes, without telling anyone, and he's going to see what happened. Because the 47 pages told him what the system reported. They did not tell him what the system felt like from inside it. And those were 2 different things. He reached into the front pocket of his hoodie, took out a letter, unfolded it carefully. The folds had gone soft from being opened and closed too many times. The letter was handwritten in blue ink on lined paper. The handwriting was careful. The kind that meant the person writing had thought hard about every single word. He read it again. Not because he had forgotten what it said, because he needed to feel the weight of it before he got on the plane. My name is Leroy Henderson. I am 67 years old. I have been flying for business for 31 years, and I have never written a letter like this before. On March 14th, I boarded Flight 209 in Atlanta. My ticket said Seat 2A, business class. I paid for it myself. I sat down. My son Darnell was with me in 2B. It was his first time flying business class. He had just accepted his first real job offer, and I wanted to do something to mark the occasion. The flight attendant came over before we even reached cruising altitude. She said there had been a mix-up. She said my seat assignment was incorrect. She said it quietly, but not quietly enough. The people around us heard. Darnell heard. I showed her my boarding pass. She said the system showed something different. I asked to speak with a supervisor. The supervisor came and said the same thing, with the same expression, looking at me the same way. We were moved to row 24. Darnell did not say anything for the rest of the flight. When we landed, he asked me one question. He said, "Dad, is this just how it is?" I did not know what to tell him. I am writing this letter because I need someone to know what happened. Not so I can get a refund. Not so anyone gets in trouble. I am writing because my son asked me a question I could not answer, and that has been keeping me awake at night. Respectfully, Leroy Henderson James folded the letter, put it back in the front pocket of his hoodie. The hoodie was gray, old, soft from years of washing. His assistant Deborah had laid out a suit the night before, hanging it on the back of the office door like a silent suggestion. He had left it hanging. He picked up the folder again, turned to page 3. The name Victor Shaw appeared on page 3, page 11, and page 38. Senior Purser, Flight Operations out of Atlanta. 3 complaints, 3 resolutions, all 3 marked resolved at crew level with the same block of standard language. 6 words, passenger concern addressed, no further action required, filed by the same hand each time, closed before they could travel upward. James had looked at that name for a long time. Then he had booked seat 1A on Victor Shaw's regular Friday morning route. He closed the folder, set it on the table, stood up and turned off the conference room light. Outside, Atlanta was beginning to decide on morning. He got to the airport at 6:30. No driver, no assistant. No one who knew where he was going or why. The check-in line moved at the pace. Check-in lines always move, which is to say slowly and without apology. The agent at the counter was distracted rather than dismissive. A meaningful difference in James's experience. He had learned a long time ago to read the space between those two things carefully, because people who confused them made expensive mistakes. He got his boarding pass, thanked her. She had already moved on. He found a seat near the gate and bought a cup of coffee from a fart that charged too much the fittest. He sat and watched the morning gather itself in the terminal. Families, business travelers with the hollow eyes of people who did this every week. A group of college students in matching university sweatshirts arranged in a loose circle of duffel bags, and a woman in a Chanel blazer working 3 pieces of luggage and a phone call simultaneously, her voice carrying through the gate noise with the ease of someone accustomed to being heard. James watched her for a moment, not with judgment, with the specific attention he paid to people who moved through space, as if the space had already agreed to accommodate them. In his experience, that quality told you something. Not everything, but something. He boarded with the general group. He had specifically unchecked the priority boarding option when he purchased the ticket. He handed his boarding pass to the gate agent without comment and walked down the jet bridge. Seat 1A was at the front left of the business cabin. Wide leather, the kind of seat that said you had arrived in the most literal possible sense. James stored his briefcase in the overhead bin. His initials were embossed on the leather in small gold letters, JC, understated in the way he preferred things. He needed to use the restroom before the doors closed. He turned back up the aisle. 4 minutes, maybe 5. He came back to find someone in his seat, the woman from the gate, the Chanel blazer, 3 bags overhead, phone still in hand. She had settled in with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times. Blazer smoothed, screens unlocked, the stillness of a person who felt entirely at home. She had not looked up when James stopped at the row. He stood for a moment, just a moment. Then he said, quietly and without any sharpness at all, "Excuse me. I think that's my seat." She looked up. The look took approximately 1 second, top to bottom, the hoodie, the jeans, the shoes, back up to his face, and then, 1 second, something moved behind her eyes. Not a thought, exactly. Faster than a thought, a conclusion that arrived before the thinking started. "Your seat," she said, flat. 2 words emptied of question. 1A. He held out his boarding pass. She did not look at it. "I've been flying business class for 15 years, she said. "I think I know which seat is mine." James kept his hand extended, patient, still. "Would you like to seize the pass?" "I would not." That was the moment. The small hinge the whole morning turned on. She could have reached into her own bag, looked at her own boarding pass, seen the 4B printed in black ink, and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." 4 words. The whole thing over in 30 seconds. A small embarrassment forgotten before the plane reached cruising altitude. Instead, Carol Brennan said, "Get your black ass out of my seat." Boy. Here is what mattered about Carol Brennan. She was not a villain in the way people imagine villains. She had not woken up that morning with cruelty in mind. She had woken up with a headache behind her left eye and a presentation due Monday that was not finished. She was 52 years old, senior marketing director at a consumer goods company, and she had been named chairwoman of their Diversity and Inclusion Committee 8 months ago. She had posted on LinkedIn at 6 that morning, "Zero tolerance for workplace discrimination. We must all do better." She had meant it when she wrote it. The problem was the space between meaning something and being it. That space was wider than most people admitted. Carol Brennan had been walking it for 52 years without looking down. She had boarded the plane distracted. She had seen 1A empty and sat down without checking her own pass. It said 4B. She had not needed to check because 1A felt correct, felt like hers. She could not have said why. She did not need to say why, because until 30 seconds ago, no one had been asking. When she said what she said, the cabin did not go silent all at once. It went silent the way rooms do when something lands that everyone heard, but no one is sure they heard correctly. A beat, and then the understanding settling, and then the quiet. A woman in 2A put down her magazines. A businessman in 3B looked up from his laptop. In row 3C, a 17-year-old named Zoe Z. Park felt her hand move to her phone before she had finished deciding to move it. She was in the window seat, her camera bag under the seat in front of her. Her media class assignment for the week: capture one real, unscripted moment. She had been on this plane 10 minutes and she had found it. She pressed record. She did not know that 340,000 people would watch the footage before the week ended. She just knew it was real, and real was what the assignment asked for. James stood in the aisle. He looked at Carol Brennan. She held his gaze with the settled expression of someone who had decided they were correct, perfect, and was waiting for the situation to agree. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He kept his boarding pass in his hand and he waited. Because he had done this before, in different rooms, with different furniture, and he had learned that the waiting itself said something. That standing still and staying quiet while someone expected you to either escalate or retreat was its own kind of answer. He was still waiting when Rachel Holt arrived. Rachel was 30 years old and had been on this route since April. She came into the business cabin with the brisk energy of someone addressing a problem. She took in the scene the way she had been trained to take things in. Assessed, concluded. The woman in 1A was composed, blazer unrumpled, settled. The man in the aisle wore a gray hoodie. Rachel had reached her conclusion before she reached the row. Sir. Her voice carried professional warmth, the kind with edges. Is there a problem here? This is my seat, James said. He extended the boarding pass again. Rachel glanced at it. Not long enough to read it. Long enough to feel like she had. Economy class is toward the rear of the aircraft. I'd be happy to help you find your seat. Carol made a small, satisfied sound. James lowered his hand. Slowly. Could you look at it properly? The boarding pass. Sir, I have looked for about half a second. Rachel straightened. I'm going to ask you not to take that tone. He had not taken any tone. He was aware he had not taken any tone. He was also aware that the accusation of tone was its own kind of maneuver, and he had seen it before, and he knew what came after it. What came after it was Victor Shaw. Victor moved down the aisle with the bearing of a man for whom authority, even mid-level authority, was its own currency. He had been a purser for 8 years. He had the clipboard and the walk and the expression that said, I see him solving a problem. He had solved many problems this way. He had also, on 3 occasions in the past 14 months, solved problems by making them disappear before they became official complaints. He did not remember the name Leroy Henderson. He had signed off on that resolution with the same pen he used for everything's. James saw the name on the badge when Victor was still 6 feet away. V. Shaw. He put his hand in his pocket, touched the folded letter. What's the situation? Victor asked. He directed the question at Rachel, not at James. Passenger claims he's in 1A, Rachel said. The word claims carrying weight. Victor looked at James, the kind of look that does not quite make eye contact. Sir, you need to return to your seat. We're preparing for departure. This is my seat, James said. I'd like you to look at my boarding pass. Victor took the pass with the brief, dismissive motion of someone who had already decided the document was wrong. He looked at it for as long as it took him to finish deciding. Not very long. These can be altered, Victor said, handing it back. Sir, I don't want to complicate this. James looked at him. Your name is Victor Shaw. Victor blinked. Yes, you've been senior purser on this route for 8 years. That's correct. Okay, James said, quietly. Like putting something away for later. Donna Pierce arrived from the rear galley. Tyler Banks followed the way. Junior crew follows senior crew when they sense something developing. 2 more bodies in the narrow aisle. 4 crew members now, arranged with the practiced formation of people who had collectively decided what the situation was. Carol watched from the seat with the expression of someone watching a problem being correctly handled. Donna's voice had no warmth, professional or otherwise. Sir, we have a departure in 8 minutes. You need to move. I understand the schedule, James said. All I'm asking is that someone verify my pass. That's all I'm asking. We've seen it. You've glanced at it. Don't get smart. Tyler Banks, 26 years old, stepped left to block more of the aisle. He was not certain what was happening. He was certain he needed to look like he was. Victor keyed his radio. I need security at gate A7, passenger refusing to comply. The request went out at 7:09. The cabin held itself still. Some passengers had their phones up, openly now. Some were pretending to read while watching. One woman in the middle rows had turned completely sideways in her seat. Zoe's live stream counter climbed. 500, 2,000, 8,000. James stood where he had been standing, one hand in his pocket, breathing even. He had been in rooms like this before, not planes specifically, rooms, offices, boardrooms, back before he owned the boardroom. Places where the atmosphere had already decided who he was and was waiting for him to confirm it. He had learned in those rooms that patience was not the same as submission, that stillness was not the same as defeat, that the people who needed him to react were the ones he should be most careful not to react for. He was thinking about Leroy Henderson. He was thinking about Calvin Henderson, 24 years old, on a flight home from what was supposed to be a test celebration, asking his father a question that no good answer existed for. He was thinking about 46 other letters he had not yet read in full, but whose first pages he had seen. 46 other moments. 46 other versions of a man or woman being redirected toward where they were assumed to belong. He was still thinking about this when he heard footsteps on the jet bridge. Officer Ray Webb was 40 years old and had worked airport security for 11 years. He had the patience of someone who had walked into many situations that looked simple and turned out not to be. He also had a well-calibrated sense for when he was being asked to perform a conclusion rather than reach one. He stepped onto the aircraft and read the room in the way he always read rooms, slowly, without announcing that he was doing it. Crew, woman in the seat, man in the aisle, 7 phones openly recording, the balance of who was standing where and what everyone's body was doing. Officer Greer, his partner, was 38 and moved with the forward lean of someone ready to act. Webb touched his arm. Just briefly, Greer stopped and waited. "Good morning," Webb said, to the general air of the cabin, which meant to everyone. "Can I see boarding documentation?" Victor stepped forward. "Officer, this passenger has been refusing." "Documentation," Webb said again. Same tone. Same pleasant steadiness. James extended his boarding pass. Webb took it and read it the way reading actually looks, which takes more than 2 seconds and involves eyes moving across the paper. Then he turned to Carol. "Ma'am, yours as well, please." Carol opened her bag. She found her boarding pass. She handed it over without looking at Webb directly, which was the first time she had not looked directly at something since she sat down. Webb held both passes. One in each hand, he looked at the left one, the right one, the seat number on each. He looked at them long enough that the cabin understood something was happening. Greer leaned over. Read both, straightened. Webb looked up. "Ma'am," he said to Carol. His voice was careful the way precision is careful. "Your boarding pass shows seat 4B. Carol opened her mouth. Victor said quickly, "There may have been a system issue at boarding." "The passes are printed at check-in," Webb said. He was still pleasant, all the way through. "Sir," to James, "this appears to be your seat." In the galley doorway, out of the main line of sight, Rachel Holt was looking at her hands. She had taken James's boarding pass from him 20 minutes ago. She had looked at it. She was remembering now, with a clarity was not comfortable with exactly what she had and had not done with those 2 seconds. She had seen the hoodie. She had handed the pass back. She had not read seat number. Carol Brennan could have said it then. Webb had given her the opening, a clean, unforced way to correct the record. She could have said, "I made a mistake. I sat Mosung's seat. I'm sorry." 7 words, the whole tongue thing would have shifted. She felt the words form. And then she felt of what she had already said. Of the 8,000 people watching on a screen she couldn't see. Of her daughter Kelsey, 26, who lived on the internet in a way Carol did not fully understand. Of what it would mean to say, "I was wrong" in front of all of that. The words went somewhere else. "There must be an error in the system," she said. James looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into the front pocket of his hoodie. Not his phone, not his boarding pass. A letter, handwritten. The folds soft. He unfolded it slowly, looked up at the 4 crew members standing in the aisle, at Carol in the seat, at the 2 officers. "I'd like to read something," he said. "It will take less than a minute." Victor said, "Sir, this is not." "Less than a minute," James said again. Something in his voice made Victor stop. Not volume, not heat. The quality of someone who had already decided what they were going to do and was no longer asking permission for it. The cabin was fully quiet. James read, "My name is Leroy Henderson. I am 67 years old. On March 14th, I boarded Flight 209 in Atlanta. My ticket said Seat 2A. I sat down. My son Calvin was with me in 2B. It was his first time flying business class. He had just accepted his first real job offer. He paused, not for effect, to breathe. We were moved to row 24 before we reached cruising altitude. Calvin didn't say anything for the rest of the flight. When we landed, he asked one question. He looked up briefly. At no one specific, he said, "Dad, is this just how it is?" A pause, the kind the letter asked for. I didn't know what to tell him. James folded the letter, returned it to his pocket. He looked at Victor Shaw. "That complaint was filed on March 15th, he said. "It was closed at crew level on March 18th. The resolution note says, passenger concern addressed, no further action required." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. "I've been carrying that letter for 3 weeks. I've read 46 others like it." The cabin did not move. Zoe's counter said 22,000. Victor Shaw opened his mouth, closed it. He had spent 8 years knowing what to say in difficult situations. He did not know what to say now. And then James reached into his briefcase, which he had retrieved from the overhead bin at some point without anyone noticing, and took out his phone. Not to show the cabin, not to make a speech. He unlocked it, opened an application, and handed it to Officer Webb quietly, as if passing him a document at a desk. Webb looked at the screen. He read it once, then again. Something shifted around his eyes. A recalibration that didn't show on the surface, but changed the angle of everything. He passed the phone to Greer. Greer read it, passed it back. "Mr. Caldwell," Webb said. "Not sir, not the passenger." "Mr. Caldwell." Victor Shaw heard the shift in those 2 syllables and felt something drop in his chest. The specific drop of a man who has just understood the ground beneath him is not what he thought it was. Rachel Holt heard it and took a small step backward. Carol Brennan heard it and looked up from her hands. James turned the phone screen toward Victor, toward the crew. He did it without drama, the way you turn a document toward someone at a table. The screen read James Caldwell, Chief Executive, majority shareholder 67%, Apex Airlines, though. Founded 2009. Victor's clipboard hit the floor. He did not pick it up. James looked at Carol Brennan. His voice did not rise. It did not harden. It was the same voice he had used for the entire conversation, which was the most unsettling thing about it. "You're sitting in seat 1A, he said. "That seat belongs to me, not because I booked it." He let the next words come without rushing them. "Because I own the plane. I own this airline, every seat on it." The cabin went quieter than it had been all morning. Not the held breath quiet of shock, something deeper. The quiet that falls when something true has been said in a room, and the room needs a moment to absorb it. The woman in 2A did not pick her magazine back up. The businessman in 3B had stopped pretending to work long ago. He was just sitting, with his hands flat on the closed laptop, watching. Victor Shaw stood without his clipboard, without his 8 years of practiced authority, without conclusion he had walked into the cabin carrying. He was just a man in a uniform in an aisle, and the ground under him was different now from what it had been when he got on the plane that morning. Rachel Holt stood in the gala doorway, not moving, not performing stillness, just standing the way people stand when all the familiar things to do with their body have turned out to be wrong. Donna Pierce looked at the floor. 15 years of career, built on the idea of following procedure correctly. The floor was not steady. Tyler Banks had drifted to the back of the group. His body's decision, not his. He was 26. He had followed senior crew because that was what you did. He understood now, with the particular clarity of someone young enough, that the lesson could still reshape things, that following the group did not distribute the responsibility for where the group went. Carol Brennan's phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down. A text from her daughter, Kelsey. "Mom, you're on TikTok. It has 24,000 viewers right now. Mom, is that you? Please tell me that isn't you." Carol read it twice. Then a third time, and she understood, for the first time, that what had happened on this plane was not going to stay on this plane. She had known that in an abstract way since she first noticed the phones. But abstraction and reality are different countries, and she had just crossed the border. Kelsey was watching. 24,000 strangers were watching. She was still sitting in seat A1A. James looked at Officer Webb. "I'd like to proceed carefully," he said. "This isn't about the seat." Webb nodded once, the nod of a man who understood exactly what was meant. James turned to face Victor Shaw, not with the energy of someone who had won something, with the energy of someone who had been waiting a long time to do something that needed doing. "Victor," he said, "let's talk about Leroy Henderson." Victor Shaw's clipboard was still on the floor. He did not reach for it. Outside the windows, the Atlanta morning had arrived fully. Clear and still, the light coming at the low angle of early October, making everything look more refined than usual. A ground crew worker moved past below, headphones on, pushing a cart, entirely unbothered by whatever was happening 20 feet above him. James kept his hand in his pocket. His fingers were on the letter. He was thinking about Calvin Henderson on a plane going home, sitting in row 24, not saying anything for the rest of the flight. Thinking about the question Calvin had asked when they landed. Thinking about Leroy Henderson, 67 years old, picking up a pen and writing something down, not because he expected it to go anywhere, but because he needed to say it somewhere. That letter had traveled a long way to get to this moment. James intended to make it worth the distance. Victor Shaw had been standing in aircraft aisles for 8 years. He knew how to read situations. That was the job. Walk in, assess, resolve. He had done it so many times it had stopped feeling like a skill and started feeling like breathing. He was not breathing well right now. The clipboard was on the floor. He kept meaning to pick it up. His hands were not cooperating. James Caldwell had said the name Leroy Henderson like it was a door being opened. And Victor could feel what was behind it. March 15th. March 18th. The crew lounge where he had typed the resolution note while his coffee went cold. Passenger concern addressed. No further action required. 40 seconds to type. He had not thought about those 6 words since. He was thinking about them now. "I don't know what you're referring to," Victor said. Which was a mistake. James had not asked him a question yet. James looked at him with the patience of a man who had already decided how this conversation was going to go and was simply waiting for Victor to catch up. "March 15th, James said. "A passenger named Leroy Henderson filed a complaint after being removed from business class on Flight 209. The complaint was processed at crew level." A pause. "Your crew level, Victor. Upgrades sometimes create conflicts in the system. If there was a discrepancy at the gate, his ticket was purchased 6 weeks in advance," James said. "Full fare. Seat 2A, no upgrade, no system conflict." Victor's jaw moved. Nothing came out. "The resolution note you filed," said passenger concern addressed. James's voice did not change register, did not go harder or softer. It stayed exactly where it had been, which was the most unsettling thing about it. "I'd like to know what that means. What was addressed? How?" Rachel Holt, standing 4 feet away, felt something shift in her chest. She had read resolution notes like that, had filed one herself 18 months ago on a situation she had not thought about since. She was thinking about it now. The captain's voice came over the intercom, measured and unhurried. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're holding briefly at the gate while a ground matter is resolved. We expect to push back shortly. We appreciate your patience." Webb had radioed the captain directly while Victor was still processing. One quiet conversation. 30 seconds. The departure could wait, which meant the conversation could proceed at the pace it needed to proceed. Victor absorbed this. The departure could wait, which meant James had already thought of that. Which meant James had already thought of a great many things before he got on this plane. "Mr. Caldwell," Victor said. His voice had found a new register. The one reserved for speaking to management. "I understand there may have been procedural questions around that complaint. I would be very happy to review the documentation with HR. "I have the documentation," James said. Victor stopped. "I've had it for 3 weeks. The silence that followed was the silence of a man realizing that what he thought was a confrontation was actually an audit. That the person standing in front of him had not arrived at this seat by accident, had not been standing in this aisle for the past 20 minutes by chance. Victor Shaw had walked onto a stage that had been constructed specifically for him. He just hadn't known he was in the production. Donna Pierce was watching Victor with the expression of someone who had known a man for 4 years and was now seeing him in a light that reorganized everything she thought she knew. She had been aware of the Henderson plaint, not the details. Victor had mentioned it in passing in the crew lounge 8 or 9 months ago, with the tone of someone dismissing something minor. Another one handled it. She had not asked questions. She had decided not to want to know. That decision was in the aisle with her now. Donna Pierce was 42 years old, 15 years in aviation. She had built her professional identity on a specific idea that she did things correctly, that she followed procedure, that she was, above all things, reliable. She looked at the floor. For the first time in a long time, she could not locate that identity clearly. Tyler Banks had moved to the rear of the cluster without consciously deciding to. His body's instinct toward minimum visibility. He was 26 years old and had been on this route for 4 months, and he had moved into that aisle because that was what you did when senior crew moved. You followed. You supported. He was understanding now, at 7:23 in the morning over the Atlanta tarmac, that following people does not relocate the responsibility for where you end up. He was also understanding that 7 people were openly filming him, that his face was probably very visible, that his name was on a crew manifest. He did not know that his personnel file would look significantly different in 90 days. He would find out later. Rachel Holt had not moved from the galley doorway. She was thinking about a boarding pass. She had taken it from James's hand. She had looked at it. She needed to be able to say she had looked at it, needed to locate the moment where she had done her job properly and made a professional assessment based on evidence. But when she tried to reconstruct those 2 seconds, she kept arriving at the same place. She had seen gray fabric, old shoes, and she had handed the pass back. She had not read the seat number. Rachel was 30 years old, and she considered herself a good person. Not perfect, but genuinely good. She donated to 2 charities. She called her mother every Sunday without being asked. She had marched in 2020 with full belief in what she was marching for. And she had looked at a boarding pass for 2 seconds and seen a hoodie instead of a number. Both of those things were true simultaneously. She was standing in the galley doorway, learning to bullet what it meant for both of those things to be true at the same time. James turned back to Victor. "The Hender through it," he said, step by step. Victor's mouth opened. He was sorting through possible responses the way a man sorts through a drawer, looking for something he knows he put there and is no longer finding. "There was a discrepancy in the gate records," he said finally. "We followed standard protocol for conflicting seat assignments. His printed ticket said 2A, James said. Purchased 6 weeks prior. I have the original purchase record. I have the gate log from that morning. I have your resolution note filed 3 days after the complaint, which means you had 3 days to review the documentation." He did not raise his voice. "So tell me what the discrepancy was." Victor said nothing. Victor. Just the name. That was all. Victor Shaw's shoulders dropped. Not dramatically, about an inch. The inch that means a person has stopped performing and arrived at something real. "I made a judgment call," he said. "About what?" A pause, long enough to feel. About whether it would go anywhere. James looked at him steadily. Whether the complaint would go anywhere. Whether the passenger would pursue it. Whether it needed to move up the chain. "And you decided it didn't." "I decided." Victor stopped, tried again. "Yes. Why?" The honest answer was available. Victor could feel it there. He had been in customer-facing roles for 8 years, and he had learned, over those years, how to talk around honest answers without quite lying. He searched for that skill now. It had gone somewhere he couldn't reach. "Because I didn't think it would matter," he said. And then quieter, mostly to himself, "Because I didn't think anyone was going to check." That sentence landed differently on different people in that cabin. Rachel heard it and thought about the boarding pass she had not read. Donna heard it and thought about the morning she had chosen not to ask Victor what handling it actually meant. Tyler heard it and thought about every moment in the past 20 minutes where he had done what the room seemed to want instead of what was actually right. Officer Webb heard it and thought about 11 years of situations that had not been checked. He did not let that show on his face, but he thought about it. Zoe Park heard it and kept filming. Because that sentence, because I didn't think anyone was going to check, was the most honest thing that had been said in this cabin all morning. And her journalism teacher had told her that honesty was the only thing worth capturing. Everything else was just footage. Carol Brennan, sitting in seat 1A, heard it, and she thought, I didn't think anyone was checking either. Not the documentation kind of check. Not the formal kind, the internal kind, the one that runs before you open your mouth, the one that asks, what am I actually doing here, and why? She had not run that check this morning. She had not run it in a long time. She had run the external ones. The LinkedIn posts, the committee meetings, the carefully worded statements about zero tolerance and doing better. But the internal check, the one in the space between the impulse and the action, she had let that one go quiet a long time ago without noticing it had gone quiet. Her phone buzzed again. She did not look at it. Zoe Park shifted her grip on the phone. Her arm had been up for 40 minutes. She switched hands without lowering the camera. The viewer count said 53,000. She had stopped reading the comments at 20,000 because they were moving faster than comprehension allowed. She had seen enough of them to know the shape of what people were feeling, which was the shape of something that had needed to be said for a long time, finally being said out loud. In public, with witnesses. She was 17 years old, and she was aware she was filming something that mattered. She was not yet sure exactly what it meant or how to write about it, and she was honest enough with herself to know that those were two different things. Capturing and understanding. She was doing the first one. The second would take longer. She wrote one line in the corner of her notebook with her free hand, awkwardly, while keeping the phone level. The story isn't what happened today. It's everything that made today necessary. She underlined it. Put the pen down. James looked at the 4 crew members. He had been looking at them turns, the way you look at a room when you're making sure you've seen all of it. I'm not going to do this here, he said. Victor blinked. Do whatever you're expecting. He did not gesture dramatically. He did not need to. The firing, the confrontation, the public accounting with an audience. He shook his head once. That's not what this is. Rachel looked up. Then what is it? Her voice had changed. The professional warmth had left it entirely. What remained was smaller, quieter, more honest. That's the first real question you've asked since I got on this plane, James said. She flinched. A small movement. Real. This, he said, is what happens when a system breaks and no one fixes it because no one believes they have to. This is 47 complaints that went nowhere. This is a man going home, not knowing what to tell his son. He looked at Victor. This is documentation and process, and an investigation that moves at the right speed, not the fast speed. A pause, which is slower than what you might be expecting, and less satisfying to watch, but it's what actually changes things. He took out his work phone. The second one, he turned slightly toward the window, not for privacy but from habit, the old habit of a man who had taken important calls in open offices for many years. Patricia, he said. It's James. I need you to open a formal investigation file. Flight 447 this morning. Document everything from 6:58 onward. I'll send the crew roster when I land. A pause. No, this evening. The process moves at the right speed. Another pause. Yes, thank you. He ended the call, turned back. That was the head of legal, he said, to no one specifically and everyone at once. The investigation is open. Everything from this morning is on record. What's been recorded here? He looked at the phones, not with accusation, with acknowledgement. Is part of that record. Victor said, Sir, if there's any way to. Victor, the name again, without anger. Without heat, just the name doing the work a name does when someone needs to stop. James looked at Rachel Holt. She was still in the galley doorway, still not moving. The posture of a person who has run out of trained responses and is standing in the gap between them. How long have you been flying, he asked. 2 years. Samrat? Since April, he nodded. Let a moment pass. Did you read my boarding pass when you took it from me? A long pause. She said, why not? She opened her mouth. The professional answer was somewhere in reach. She could feel its shape. An answer about procedure and crew judgment and the complexity of in-flight situations. She could probably have delivered it convincingly. She did not. Because I already thought I knew what it said, she said. It's before I looked. Based on what? Another pause, longer. Based on. She stopped, started again. Based on what you looked like, and I know that. She shook her head. I know. James let the sentence stand. He did not fill the space after it. Then he said, "Thank you for saying it," which was not what she had expected. She had expected something harder. This absence of hardness was, in some ways, more difficult to receive. He turned to Donna Pierce. She looked up when he said her name. Her face was controlled in the way of someone who had spent 15 years being professional in difficult situations and was applying that skill now as a barrier against feeling what she was feeling. "You knew," James said. "Not a question." Donna's jaw tightened. "Not about me," he said. "About the situation. You came in here and something was off and you knew it. I could see it in the way you assessed the room when you walked in. You made a choice. I followed my senior officer." "You have 15 years," James said. "That's not a junior answer. That's a choice." A long pause, the longest she had taken. "I knew something wasn't right," she said. The words came out with the particular heaviness of something that has been held for a while. "I chose to let it go." "Why?" She looked at him steadily. She was going to give him the careful answer, the one that preserved something. "Because it felt easier," she said instead. The honesty surprised the room. It may have surprised Donna herself. James nodded once. "I know," he said. "It usually does." He looked at Tyler Banks. Tyler had been hoping, with the specific hope of a 26-year-old who has made a significant error, that no one would address him directly. He straightened when James looked at him, because there was nothing else to do. "Sir, I want to say I understand that I followed the senior crew, and I know now that. How old are you?" James asked. 26. James looked at him for a moment, the look of someone doing a calculation that has nothing to do with numbers. "Following the group doesn't mean you're not responsible for where the group goes," he said. "That's not a legal point. It's a life point. Learn it now. You'll use it." Tyler said nothing. He nodded the nod of a person who intends to carry something for a long time. James looked at Carol Brennan. She was still in seat 1A. She had not moved since Webb confirmed the boarding passes. Her phone was in her lap. She was looking at it without seeing it. "Miss Brennan," he said. She looked up. He crossed the 3 feet to her row and stood in the aisle. He did not loom. He did not use his height. He just stood the way people stand when they have something to say and intend to say it simply. "You sat down in the wrong seat," he said. "That's where this started. And when I asked you to move, you made a choice. And then you made another one. And then another one." He looked at directly. "Each one was yours." Carol held his gaze. Her composure was still intact at the surface. Below the surface, something was shifting that had not shifted in a long time. "I know," she said. It was the quietest she had spoken all morning. "The woman in your LinkedIn post," James said. "The one who wrote zero tolerance for workplace discrimination. She was real when you wrote it?" "Yes." "Then she's who you have to answer to," he said. "Not me." He turned back toward the front of the cabin. Officer Webb was still present. Present in the way of someone who understood his role had shifted from enforcement to witness. "Mr. Caldwell," Webb said quietly, "what would you like us to do?" "Document everything," James said. "Both of you. Your full account. I'll need it for the investigation." Webb nodded. "You'll have it." James looked at the 4 crew members one final time. Victor without his clipboard, Rachel without her professional warmth, Donna with her eyes somewhere she couldn't quite meet, Tyler very still. "You'll all hear from our HR department," he said formally. "Through the investigation. Not today. The process takes the time it needs." He looked at Victor specifically. "I need your full cooperation. Every document, every communication related to the Henderson complaint and the 2 others you resolve the same way." Victor said, "I'll cooperate." He said it like a man who has accepted a door closing and is not going to pretend it isn't. James nodded once. Then he sat down in seat 1A, which was his, which had always been his. Zoe Park lowered her arm for the first time in 43 minutes. She put the phone in the seat pocket, still recording, angled at the cabin. She picked up her notebook with both hands now. Wrote for 90 seconds without stopping. Once she put the pen down, she had the bones of the piece she would spend the next 3 months building. She did not know that yet. She just knew she had seen something she needed to understand, more slowly than a live stream allowed. Carol Brennan's phone buzzed again. "Kelsey," a 3rd time. "Mom, please." Carol typed 2 words. Sent them. "I know." She put the phone face down in her lap. She looked at the seat numbers along the business cabin. 1A1B, 2A 2B. The ordinary logic of a numbered system designed to be simple and unambiguous. Each seat belonging to someone, determined in advance, documented. She looked at her boarding pass, still in her other hand. 4B, clear as anything. Had been clear the whole time. She turned it over, looked at the back, which was blank, told her nothing, which was perhaps the point. Outside, the Atlanta tarmac moved with the ordinary morning activity of a busy airport. Ground crews, fuel trucks, a plane taxiing toward Rambekle position in the distance, growing small. The gate agent's voice came over the jet bridge intercom, checking on status. Webb radioed back. Situation resolved. Ready for departure. The response came through. Copy. Ground crew standing by. The plane was going to leave now, 39 minutes late, which, in airline terms, was recoverable. James Caldwell knew that better than anyone on board. He had run the numbers on delay recovery for this route so many times the formula was reflexive. He opened his briefcase, took out the folder, 47 pages, all reviewed, all documented, all waiting for the investigation that had just been opened. He set the folder on the tray table. He did not open it yet. He looked out the window at the runway stretching ahead, at the city's edge visible beyond the airport perimeter. Atlanta, where he had started, where he had worked 6 years in an industry he would eventually come to own, in roles that no one connected to the man in seat 1A when they looked at the man in the gray hoodie, where Leroy Henderson lived, and Calvin Henderson, and where the letter had been written that was now folded in his hoodie pocket. He put his hand on the folder, opened it to page 2, a different name, a different city, a different moment that had been filed and closed and set aside. He started reading. The captain's voice came over the intercom, clear and unhurried. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience this morning. We're pushing back now. Flight time to New York is approximately 2 hours and 10 minutes. We expect to arrive at JFK at 10:18. The engines shifted tone. The plane began to move. The plane landed at JFK at 10:21, 4 minutes behind the captain's estimate, which meant the delay had been almost entirely recovered at altitude, in the ordinary way that things get recovered when the people responsible for them are paying attention. New York was gray, not threatening gray, the settled gray of a city that had already decided on its weather and moved on to other concerns. The kind of morning that asked nothing dramatic of anyone. James Caldwell waited while the cabin emptied, not out of deference. Out of the habit of a man who had learned that the rush to be first off a plane never saved time. It just relocated the waiting to a different hallway. He watched the passengers file past. The businessman from 3B who had closed his laptop 40 minutes into the flight and not reopened it. The woman from 2A who had put her magazine down when Carol said what she said and never picked it back up. A family from the middle rows, a father with a child on his hip and a diaper bag on the other shoulder, moving with the efficient exhaustion of someone who had been managing logistics since before dawn. Near the back of the deplaning group, a man named Gerald moved carefully down the aisle. 69 years old, retired. He had a granddaughter in Queens he was going to see. She was 4, and her name was Iris, and she had recently learned to spell it and wanted everyone to know immediately. He had been in the window seat near the back all morning. He had watched everything from the distance of row 24, which was the same row that Leroy Henderson's had been moved to on Flight 209 in March. Gerald did not know that, but he had watched the whole thing from row 24, and something about them sat in his chest in a way he would carry for a while. He passed the front of the business cabin without looking back. James let the last few passengers pass. Then he stood, retrieved his briefcase from the overhead bin, clicked the latch. He put his hand in his hoodie pocket. The letter was there. He walked up the aisle. Apex Airlines headquarters occupied the top 4 floors of a building in Midtown that looked, from the outside, exactly like the buildings on either side of it. This was intentional. James had chosen it specifically because it did not announce itself. He had seen enough buildings that did. The ones with the logos at street level and the atrium lobbies designed to communicate importance before anyone had done anything important inside them. He preferred the kind of building that said, "Come in, and we will show you." He arrived at 11:48. His assistant Deborah was at her desk, which she always was, had been for 11 years, with the calm of someone who had seen enough that very little surprised her anymore. She looked up when he came in. She looked at the hoodie. She did not say anything about the hoodie. Patricia is in the conference room, she said. HR has been briefed. Legal has been briefed. She paused. Your personal phone has 847 messages. Your work phone has 3s and 12. The general media inbox stopped being countable around 10 this morning. James stopped the stream. 4.1 million views as of 11:30. She looked at him steadily. It's still moving. He stood in the hallway outside his own office and let that number settle. 4.1 million people who had been present in some sense for the letter and the boarding passes and Victor Shaw's clipboard on the floor and the 2 syllables of Mr. Caldwell changing the air in the cabin. Okay, he said, and went in. Patricia Hendricks was 51 years old and had been the head of legal at Apex for 6 years. She had the bearing of someone who was always the most prepared person in any room and had long since stopped finding that remarkable. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her that was already half covered in notes. She walked James through the framework without preamble. Scope of investigation, timeline, documentation requirements, individual crew interviews, scheduled separately to prevent account alignment, passenger records to be formally reviewed, internal communication logs for the past 18 months. Victor Shaw is suspended pending investigation, she said. Full pay until formal findings. Full pay, James confirmed. The investigation determines consequences. Not this morning, Patricia made a note. The note was unhesitating. She had worked with James long enough to know that when he said seem up like that, he meant it structurally, not emotionally. The distinction mattered. Rachel Holt, Donna Pierce, Tyler Banks, she continued. Administrative leave with pay until their interviews are complete. The Henderson complaint is being reopened as the anchor case. We'll need to contact Mr. Henderson directly. She paused. I'd like to do that myself, in person, not a call. Someone should sit down with him. James looked at her. I want to go, she said, simply. When? I can take the 1:30 flight, she said. Be there by 4:30. Okay, he said. She closed the legal pad. There's one more thing. A pause, careful. When 4 million people watch something, some of them find people before we do. Mr. Henderson may already know. James considered this. Then go now, he said. Take the 1:30. She was already standing. Patricia Hendricks knocked on the door of a house in a quiet part of Atlanta at 4:35 that afternoon. Leroy Henderson answered. He was 67 years old, which was exactly what 67 looked like when a man had spent his life working and was still working, still upright, still careful about the door he opened. He had reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He was holding a mug of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. He looked at Patricia, at the Apex Airlines identification she held out, at her face. You'd better come in, he said. They sat at his kitchen table. The table was the kind that had been in the same spot for 20 years, that had hosted homework and arguments and Sunday dinners and all the ordinary weight of a family's time. Patricia sat across from him with her legal pad and did not open it. She told him what had happened. On Flight 447 that morning, she told him about the hoodie and the boarding pass and the letter James had carried in his pocket for 3 weeks. She told him that James Caldwell had read his letter out loud in a cabin of 200 people. Leroy Henderson listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He read it out loud, he said. Yes, to the whole cabin. Yes. Leroy looked at his coffee mug. He turned it in his hands, not drinking from it, just turning it. I didn't expect anyone to do anything with it, he said. When I wrote it, I didn't. I've filed things before. You file them, and they go somewhere, and nothing comes back. You learn not to wait for something to come back. I understand, Patricia said. I wrote it because Darnell asked me that question, and I needed to put it somewhere. He looked up. My son, he's 24, he just started his career, and he asked me if that's just how it is. He paused, and I couldn't tell him it wasn't, because I didn't know if I could promise him that. Patricia, that's it without filling it. Mr. Henderson, she said, the investigation open. Your complaint and 2 others handled the same way are now the anchor cases. Mr. Caldwell would like you to know that your letters is the reason I was on that plane today. Leroy sets his mug down. My boy Darnell, he said. He's 24, marketing degree from Georgia State. He's been looking for work in brand strategy for 8 months. He said it without wait, without asking for anything. Just stating it. 11 applications. Nothing serious came back. Patricia looked at him. I don't know if that's related to anything, Leroy said. I'm not saying it is. I'm just telling you because you helped buy my houses and you told me the truth, and I'm going to tell you the truth back. I'm glad you did, Patricia said. She wrote Darnell Henderson's name on her legal pad, underlined it once. She was already thinking about who to call. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Carol Brennan was sitting in her office with the door closed. She never closed her door on a Friday. Closed doors on Friday sent a signal she had always been careful not to send. But she had closed it at noon and had not opened it since, and the people outside the glass had read the signal and left her alone. Her assistant had been fielding calls all morning. Carol could see this through the glass. The phone picked up and set down. Picked up and set down. She had texted a brief instruction at noon, please hold everything until further notice. Her assistant had replied with a single word. Understood. Carol had been in this office for 6 years. She had made decisions in this room that had shaped careers, budgets, brand directions, campaign launches. She was good at decisions. That was, in the simplest description of her professional value, what she was for. She was not deciding anything right now. She was sitting in a chair she had sat in 1,000 times, looking at a presentation she had not added a word to since she came back from the airport, and thinking about a boarding pass that said 4B. Kelsey had called at 11. The call had lasted 34 minutes. Carol knew the exact length because she had been watching the timer the whole time, measuring something she couldn't name. Kelsey did not yell. She had not been raised to yell. She had been raised by Carol to ask precise questions and wait for precise answers. Mom, what happened? I sat down in the wrong seat. I wasn't paying attention. And then when he asked me to move, when he asked you. I know, Kelsey. Mom. When he asked you to move, what did you think? A long pause. Long enough that Kelsey said her name once quietly to check she was still there. I thought I was right, Carol said. I thought I belonged there and he didn't. And I didn't ask why I thought that. I just thought it. Silence on the line. Do y'all know why, Kelsey asked? And Carol Brennan, 52 years old, who had been giving confident answers to hard questions for most of her adult life, said, No. I'm trying to understand it. Kelsey had been quiet for a moment. Okay, she said, that's a start. The call had ended there. Not badly, not with resolution, just with that. That's a start, which was the kind of the most demanding thing Kelsey had ever said to her, and Carol was not yet sure which. She was still sitting with it when her assistant knocked at 2:45. There's someone here from Apex Airlines, her assistant said through the partial opening. She says she has something for you from Mr. Caldwell. She said she's not here in a legal capacity. She said to tell you it's personal. Carol looked at her desk. At the presentation she had not touched, at the coffee that had gone cold before noon. Send her in, she said. Patricia Hendricks sat down across from her without arrangement, without the performance of official arrival. She set a letter on the desk between them. Carol looked at it, handwritten blue ink, the folds soft. The original, Patricia said. Mr. Caldwell asked that it come from a person, not an envelope. Carol reached for it, held it without opening it. The paper was lighter than she expected. You would not know from holding it what weight it carried. He's already spoken with Mr. Henderson, Patricia said. This afternoon I went to his house. Carol looked up. Mr. Henderson has a son, Patricia said. His name is Darnell. He's 24. He has a marketing degree. He's been looking for work in brand strategy for 8 months. Carol was very still. Mr. Caldwell's message, Patricia continued, is not a condition, it's not a demand. He was specific about that. There are no strings attached to this letter or to this conversation. Then what is it? Carol said. He said, she chairs a diversity and inclusion committee. That letter tells her what to do with that power, if she chooses to. The last 4 words, if she chooses to, not or else, not you owe this, not here is your punishment dressed as an opportunity. A door, open, unforced, which was, Carol thought, the more demanding version. A demand you could resent was easier to navigate than a choice you had to make freely. She opened the letter. She read it slowly. The handwriting careful, the words chosen. My son asked me a question I could not answer. She read to the end, folded it close, set it on the desk. She looked at Patricia. Darnell Henderson, she said. Send me his portfolio. Patricia reached into her bag and set a manila folder on the desk beside the letter. I anticipated you might ask, she said. Carol looked at the folder, looked at Patricia. You came prepared. I work for a man who comes prepared, Patricia said. It's contagious. For the first time since 78 that morning, something shifted in Carol's face that was not grief or shame or damage control. It was small, barely visible, but it was there. She opened the portfolio. The investigation took 11 weeks. 11 weeks of interviews conducted separately, of communication logs reviewed, of documentation cross-referenced against complaint records and gate system data and crew scheduling reports. 11 weeks of the procedural work that looks like nothing from the outside and changes everything from the inside. At the end of 11 weeks, the findings were unambiguous. Victor Shaw's termination was confirmed. The Henderson complaint and 2 additional complaints had been deliberately suppressed. He had made a 3 times to close what should have moved upward. In his own written account during the investigation, he had used the phrase "didn't see the need to escalate," which was a more formal version of what he had said on the plane. He hadn't thought anyone was going to check. The investigation also found what James had suspected from page 1 of the folder. Victor Shaw was not an anomaly. He was a symptom. The system had made his choices easy to make. Oversight structures that existed on paper and not in practice. Reporting chains that concentrated too much judgment in individual supervisors without independent review. Complaint resolution timelines too short to allow proper investigation and too long to create urgency. You could remove Victor Shaw and not fix any of that. You could remove him and have a different version appear in a different city, on a different route within 6 months. James had seen this pattern before, in other contexts, and he knew that removing the individual while leaving the system intact was the most common form of institutional congratulation that produced no lasting change. He was not interested in institutional self-congratulation. He spent the 3 months after the investigation building. The new oversight structure had 3 tiers. Crew-level documentation required within 60 seconds of any passenger dispute, logged to a central system rather than a supervisor's clipboard. Independent review within 24 hours for any complaint involving seating, appearance-based language, or escalated security involvement. A 3rd-tier audit, conducted quarterly by a team that reported directly to James's office, reviewing all resolved complaints across all routes. He hired 2 passenger advocates, one based in Atlanta, one in New York. Their job was the complaints, all of them. Every page, they reported directly to him. He redesigned the training program, not a half-day workshop with a completion certificate. A curriculum, ongoing, real scenarios from real complaint files, names removed, everything else intact. The scenario from Flight 447 was the first case in the curriculum. Nobody had to discuss why it was first. Rachel Holt returned to active flight duty after 8 weeks on the training redesign team. She had a specific usefulness she had not anticipated. She knew exactly which moment the new protocol would have interrupted the morning of Flight 447, because she had lived that moment and spent 8 weeks understanding it from every angle. Her first flight back was a morning departure, business cabin, a dispute at row 2, a boarding pass discrepancy, 2 passengers and a gap in the record. Rachel asked for both boarding passes. Read both of them. The way reading properly looks, which takes actual seconds, resolved it in 4 minutes. She did not think about it until she was in the galley after takeoff, and then she thought about it once. The simple rightness of having done the obvious thing. She took out the small notebook she had started carrying and made a note. Not about the dispute, about the feeling. She was learning to pay attention to how correct things felt different from incorrect ones, because she had found that incorrect ones could feel entirely natural if you were not watching carefully. Tyler Banks kept his job, formal written warning, 40 hours of mandatory training, which he completed without the resentment he had expected to feel. He found somewhere in the middle of the 3rd week that he was not sitting there to satisfy a requirement, but because he was genuinely learning something he had not known he needed. He made a laminated card, 3 items, printed on cardstock, laminated at a copy shop near his apartment. Read the document. Then assess, in that order. He kept it in his uniform pocket. His supervisor saw it once and asked about it. "Something I learned," Tyler said. "From the training?" "From a morning in Atlanta," he said. Donna Pierce received a formal demotion, not termination. The investigation had found that her failure was one of omission rather than the active suppression Victor had engaged in, and the findings reflected that distinction. She moved from the senior track she had been building toward for 15 years into a lateral position that would not advance the same way. She accepted it without protest. The acceptance was not the relieved kind. It was the kind that feels like the correct consequence of a choice made and unmade and lived with. She became, in the months after, not a dramatically different person, but a more watchful one. She started asking questions in briefings she would previously have let pass. Small questions. The kind that say, I am not going to choose comfortable, full silence again. It was the beginning of a different habit. And habits, built one small decision at a time, were what actually changed how things ran. Victor Shaw was gone. Terminated with cause, the notation in his employment record, formal and permanent. He had taken a position at a small regional operation in the Midwest, starting over far below where he had been. The aviation trade publications covered his termination briefly, and the doors that mattered were closed. He began, in the months after, attending a professional ethics program his wife had found. He had not gone willingly at first. In the program, he was sometimes asked to speak about what he had done. He did not enjoy this, but he did it. He said each time, a version of the same thing. 10 minutes of assumptions destroyed 8 years of work. And I didn't even know I was making assumptions. I thought I was making professional assessments. The distinction between those two things was what I was still learning to see. 3 weeks after the investigation concluded, James received a letter, handwritten, blue ink, a different hand from Leroy Henderson's, younger, slightly rushed. The handwriting of someone writing quickly before they changed their mind. Mr. Caldwell, my name is Darnell Henderson. You know who I am. I'm writing anyway because some things should be written down, not said in a meeting. I started at my new position in September. Marketing associate. Brand strategy. It's a real job. I'm learning things. I'm not writing to thank Ms. Brennan, though I've done that already. I'm writing because my dad told me what you did on that plane. He told me about the letter. That you kept it in your pocket. That you read it out loud to 200 people. He said he didn't write it expecting anyone to do anything with it. He wrote it because he needed to put it somewhere. I want you to know that matters, not the outcome. The act of carrying it. The act of reading it out loud in a room full of people who needed to hear it. My dad smiles differently now when I call him. I don't know how else to describe it. He smiles the same smile, but something underneath it is different. Like a weight he got so used to carrying that he stopped noticing it was there. And now it's a little lighter, and he notices the difference even if he can't name it. He hasn't asked me that question again. The one from the plane, I think he got his answer. Thank you. Darnell Henderson James read it at his desk on a Tuesday morning. Read it once, read it again. Then he folded it carefully, put it in an envelope, wrote Henderson on the outside, and placed it in the drawer where he kept the things he needed to keep. He sat for a moment. Deborah appeared in the doorway. She saw his face and did not ask. I'm going to need a frame, he said. She tilted her head. For Leroy Henderson's letter, he said. The one that's been in my pocket. I want it on the wall. She considered this. That's a somewhat unusual wall decoration for a CEO. That's the point, he said. She went to find a frame. He opened his laptop. 6 meetings before noon, a call with the board at 2, a review of the new complaint protocol at 4. The work that ran underneath everything else, unglamorous and continuous, and the only kind that actually held. He opened the first document and started reading. On a Friday morning in March, 6 months and 1 week after Flight 447, James Caldwell arrived at JFK for an early departure. Atlanta route. He was wearing a gray hoodie, not the same one, same in every way that mattered. Old, soft, unannounced. He had unchecked priority boarding when he bought the ticket. He walked to the gate with the general boarding group and waited his turn. The woman ahead of him had a toddler and a stroller, and the focused exhaustion of someone who had been managing logistics since 4 in the morning. James held the jet bridge door while she maneuvered through. She thanked him without looking up. He said, of course, and meant it. He boarded, walked to the front of the business cabin. Seat 1A, he stored his briefcase overhead, gold initials J. He sat down. The flight attendant who came through for pre-departure service was someone he did not know. New hire. Name badge, said Anita. 28 maybe. The composure of someone still building their version of it. Still practicing the shape. She stopped at his row. "Good morning, can I get you something before we push back?" "Coffee," he said. "Black, please." "Of course." She turned to go, and stopped, turned back, quieter now. The professional register set aside for something more direct. "Mr. Caldwell?" He looked up. "I completed the new training program last month, the case studies." She paused. "The one from October. The letter." She shook her head slightly, not in dismissal, but in the way of someone still turning something over. "I think about that a lot. The part about carrying it." James looked at her. "Good," he said. She nodded once. Went to get his coffee. He looked out the window while the plane finished loading. The tarmac busy in the morning way. Ground crews, fuel trucks. Equipment moving with the practiced rhythm of a system that had been doing this long enough to make it look easy. In his hoodie pocket was a letter. Not Leroy Henderson's. That one was framed on the wall of his office now, between the window and the door, where she saw it every time he entered and every time he left. The first thing he had ever hung in that office that was not a chart or a certification or a photograph of an aircraft. Deborah had straightened it twice since he hung it. He had straightened it back both times. He liked the slight angle. It looked like something that had arrived, rather than something that had been placed. This letter was from a man named Eugene Farris, 63 years old, Memphis, Tennessee. Filed 12 days ago, flagged by the Atlanta Passenger Advocate with a note that said simply, "You should read this one yourself." James had read it Thursday morning, standing at his desk, not sitting down. Then he had put it in his pocket. Zoe Park had submitted her media class project in November. Not the live stream footage itself. The live stream had reached 1 million views by then, a number that still surprised her. But a 12-page essay accompanied by a 6-minute edited piece that focused not on the confrontation at the front of the cabin, but on the faces of the passengers watching it. The woman in 2A who put her magazine down. The businessman in 3B who stopped pretending to work. Gerald, 69, visible for about 4 seconds in one frame, whose expression held something Zoe had spent 3 paragraphs trying to describe correctly. She had called it the recognition of something you have been carrying for a long time, and assumed you would carry alone. Her teacher had circled that sentence. The essay won the Regional Journalism Award in December. In January, Zoe had flown down to Atlanta to interview Leroy Henderson. Her father came with her. They sat at his kitchen table for 4 hours. She drank his coffee. She listened. He talked about 31 years of flying, the accumulation of small moments you swallow because the flight is boarding. The medium ones you file and stop expecting anything from. The one in March that had made him pick up a pen and write a letter he had not expected anyone to act on. He talked about Darnell, about the dinner they had after landing in Atlanta, at the restaurant Darnell had chosen, the one he had been saving for a celebration. How Darnell had ordered his usual and talked about the new job and the commute and what he was learning, and had not mentioned the plane again. He didn't need to, Leroy said. We both already knew. Zoe wrote it all down. The plane pushed back at 7:54 on time. At cruising altitude, the man in 2A shifted and looked across the aisle. 57 years old. Construction company in Queens, this route 6 times a year. He had been in 2A on October 7th. Had watched everything. Said nothing. Gone home and told his wife and received the look she gave him when she was not going to press, but was not going to forget either. He had thought about that look for 3 months. He looked across at James Caldwell, reading something in a thin folder with the attention of a man for whom careful reading was not optional. He reached into his jacket pocket, found a business card, turned it to the blank side, wrote a name on it. A young man he knew, 22 years old, who had been trying to get into the trades for 18 months and kept running into the same walls. He wrote the name and his own number, folded the card once. He did not know yet exactly what he was going to do with it. But he had written it down, and writing something down meant you intended to do something with it. The plane descended into Atlanta at 10:11. James closed the folder. He looked out the window at the approach, the city assembling itself below, the highways and rooftops and the places he had driven past 1,000 times. A city that had produced him and that he had built something in, and it contained, somewheres in its quiet morning streets, Leroy Henderson at a kitchen table and Darnell Henderson on his way to work. And whatever form the answer to that question was currently taking in the world. Is this just how it is? He put his hand in his pocket. 63, Memphis. I needed to say it somewhere. I didn't know if anyone would hear it. Someone had heard it. The wheels touched down, a smooth landing. The ground there suddenly solid after the long arc of the approach. Anita came through the cabin for the post-landing checks, moving with more ease than at departure. The shape of competence settling in the way it does when you have been doing something for a few hours and remembered you know how. She passed his row. Good landing, good flight, he said. She smiled, continued up the aisle. He waited while the cabin cleared. Then he stood, retrieved his briefcase, felt the weight of it, backed up the aisle, through the door, down the jet bridge, into the Atlanta terminal, moving the way airports move at mid-morning. Continuous, purposeful, full of people, arriving and departing and carrying things toward somewhere they could not yet see. He walked through it, gray hoodie, old shoes, briefcase with the gold initials, one hand in his pocket, fingers resting on the edge of the Eugene Ferris letter. He had a meeting at noon, a call at 2, a review session at 4 with the passenger advocates. They had new cases to show him, new patterns, the documentation of a system trying to be different from what it had been. He walked toward the exit. He thought about Leroy Henderson's letter on the wall. He thought about Darnell Henderson going to work this morning. He thought about Rachel Holt with her notebook, Tyler Banks with his laminated card, Donna Pierce asking questions in briefings she would have stayed quiet in before, Zoe Park at a kitchen table in Atlanta, listening. He thought about Carol Brennan, who had posted 44 words on LinkedIn 6 weeks ago that said nothing specific but said, "I know what I did. I'm still in it." He had read once, since closed his phone and gone back to work. That was all she had asked of him. To read it, to know she had written it. The rest was hers. He walked, gray hoodie, old shoes. One letter in his pocket and the work ahead of him and the knowledge, held quietly and without drama, that this was what it looked like. Not the moment on the plane. Not the moment when everything turned. Those moments mattered, but they were not the work. The work was this. One letter at a time, one name at a time, one flight at a time, until it wasn't just how it is anymore.